Assalamu alaikum, listeners. You're listening to radiosira.com and Radio Sira on 1575 AM. It is 5 p.m. or 5:04 p.m. almost, with me, Ibrahim, on this, alhamdulillah, rainy afternoon in Leicester. Inshallah, today we've got, joining me virtually, is Brother Shaukat Patel of MEND, and we'll be talking about Islamophobia. So, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Shaukat.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Ibrahim. Jazakallah for having me on the show, and assalamu alaikum to all your listeners as well.
Barakallah fi, the pleasure's all mine. I'd be talking to myself for the next hour if I didn't have you on, so alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for joining me. Okay, so launching straight into it, what is Islamophobia?
Well, Islamophobia is taken up in lots of different ways, Brother Ibrahim. There's official definitions. I can talk to you and give you a very technical definition, which was accepted by a majority of the political parties and academics, etc., which says that Islamophobia is a form of racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So it's a quite large definition. But reality, what does Islamophobia mean for you, for myself, for our families, for our children? It means that people have a perception of Islam or perception of Muslims, and therefore they are prejudiced and work against the Muslim community in a particular form or shape. So we'll discuss this, I'm sure, throughout the show, but that could manifest itself at schools for children with bullying levels that are increasing against Muslims. That could work in employment, as Muslims are finding it more difficult to find jobs just because they have Muslim names. And it could mean other more extreme forms, which is, sisters walking on the streets being attacked because they're wearing a hijab, or even more extreme forms, that people being physically murdered because of their faith. So Islamophobia sits on a spectrum, and it can be presented in lots and lots of different forms.
Well, okay. And for our listeners, who are you, and what's your involvement in Islamophobia?
So, alhamdulillah, so I'm just a layperson. I'm from the city of Leicester. I'm a volunteer for an organisation, as you described, I think, in the introduction, of MEND, which is Muslim Engagement and Development. So what we are is a community-inspired, community-run and community-funded organisation that tackles all forms of hate, but majority we tackle Islamophobia in all its shape and all its guises. And we do that by working with the community, and we do that by combating Islamophobia, again, in all the ways that I've explained earlier, whether it's people being verbally or physically attacked, or whether we feel that a certain government legislation is perceived to be Islamophobic and is going to affect the Muslim community in a negative way.
Okay, excellent. And I understand you're the chair of the local chapter of MEND. Is that right?
Yeah, so what we have is working groups up and down the country. So we're all volunteers, mashallah, and these volunteers take all shapes and sizes and all ages. For example, we have people who are retired, people who are at university, people who are in the working lives, brothers, sisters, etc., educated in terms of professional or even housewives. Everybody's got a role to play, and we're all volunteers, and we're working for a common goal, inshallah, to make it more comfortable for the Muslim community to live in this country, being British and Muslim at the same time, and seeing no contradiction to that.
Excellent. Okay. And listeners, if you've got any questions on Islamophobia, please feel free to text in any time during this next 50 odd minutes on 073 05 82 8531. That's 073 05 82 8531. Okay, Brother Shaukat, whereabouts is Islamophobia occurring? Can you give me some examples of Islamophobia worldwide that you can think of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I say, there's Islamophobia prevalent in our country here. But if we step back and look at Islamophobia globally, alhamdulillah, I don't think there'll be many people out there that are not aware of the situation affecting the Muslim community in, possibly, without exaggeration, the four corners of the world. So we had now the end of a presidency in America who, on his first day, of his presidency, announced that no Muslims from certain Muslim countries are not allowed to enter his country. That is a specific attack against Islam and Muslims, highlighting them as different as others. If we come closer to our origins, a lot of your listeners and a lot of our listeners tonight will come from the subcontinent, and we see the situation of many Muslims that live in India. Now, India is a country of 1.3 billion people, over 200 million of which are from Muslim background. And we have been residing in India for centuries in harmony with the indigenous population, contributed to everything from the politics of that country to the architecture of that country to the social fabric of that country. But yet, just last month, very quickly, Brother Ibrahim, the state of Assam passed a legislation where they wanted to stop Islamic seminaries, Darul Ulooms, madrasas, from opening up. And they want to not only open up, they want to shut down. And the head of the Assam state said by the end of April, we will shut down 700 madrasas in Assam. And that is just one form of Islamophobia that unfortunately our brothers and sisters are experiencing in India. Not just Muslims, but even other minorities are being affected in that state, in that country as well. And if we take it a little bit further to the border there with Bangladesh, and we have heard of the situation in Rohingya, the Rohingyan Muslims from Burma, they have been expelled from their home. They're virtually people who don't even have a homeland at the moment, and the only differentiating factor, nothing else, is the fact that they're Muslims. Mm-hmm. So they were attacked, they were harassed, they were attacked, they were targeted, and they had to flee their homes that they have been living in for, again, so many generations. So we go further away, and we come closer towards our continent, our home, and our continent, Europe. We saw recently what many of your listeners will be aware of. There was an attack by an individual in Austria, on the back of which the Austrian government wanted to proceed with so many legislations, so many laws, virtually banning any form of Islam presentation, of any form of Islamic manifestation in that country, wearing the hijab, teaching even Islam in schools and colleges. A lot of those have been repelled, but those are the sort of laws that they were bringing in. And if we come even closer to home, in France, we saw after the situation with the teacher that the French Premier passed a legislation where he made sure that and a charter was signed with all the Muslim organizations in France that the French Republic values should always supersede any religious values. Mm-hmm. So the values and the principles of French culture should always supersede any religious culture as well. And any Islamic organization, and they're trying really hard, that have any political influence must be banned in France as well. Mm-hmm. So these are just some of the examples. We could have a show on each country and it would take an hour. And we saw Sri Lanka as well just recently. We heard about during the COVID-19, the Muslims prior to COVID-19 in Sri Lanka were being, again, victimized, targeted, othered, after the incident, a terrorist incident that happened 2-3 years where every Muslims were being targeted after that they have been one of only 2 countries in the world where if one was to pass away during COVID time or was tested positive for COVID, should be cremated, although there is virtually no scientific evidence suggests that there is any harm or any risk of spreading by burial. And in December, a 3-week-old baby who was unfortunately diagnosed with COVID was taken away, passed away, and was cremated. And he was the only child of his parents. They'd been waiting for this baby for 6 years of marriage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a child. 3 weeks later, Allah took him away, and they didn't even have the peace and the closure of being able to bury this child. The hospital said, sorry, we've cremated it. You can come pick up the ashes when you're ready. So this is some of the situations of the global Islamophobia that is occurring.
Okay. Putting aside the cremations case, so for example, let's take the Assam. You mentioned Assam in India and the madrasas being shut. There must be a reason why the government's doing that. For example, what are they teaching in the madrasas? Are they teaching violence in the madrasas? That's probably the reason why they shut the madrasas.
No, these are just general madrasas that you and I would have probably attended, Ibrahim. There is always a government agenda of why these madrasas should be shut. So the official line is that we have plenty of religious institutions. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough teachers. So therefore, we should only be building secular education buildings. So that would be across the board. But when you take this one aspect in systematic with every other legislations that have been passed, for example, the Citizen Amendment Act of 2 years ago now, I think it was CAA, and the persecution of Muslims, of cow vigilantes, of love jihad. I mean, and India itself, as I said to you earlier, Bombay, could be a show on its own. So that is just another one little string to the bow of demonizing and othering the Muslim community.
Okay, so it seems to be targeted specifically at the Muslim community, and not anything that the Muslim community has done. It just seems to be.
No, I mean, these things are a narrative that is being weaved by people that want to other the Muslim community. And if you take even the United Nations reports, if you take Amnesty International, who have been banned in India because of them highlighting the treatment of the Muslim community in India. If you look at academics, writers like Anurith Roy, who's written literature, Nobel Peace Prize, not Nobel Peace Prize, Booker Man winning prize literature, she said the situation in India for Muslims is close to genocide. So these are the opinions of people that are not even Muslims. So it's not crying wolf. We're not saying that we're victims all the time, but there seems to be a situation of Islamophobia globally, which fits the narrative of nationalistic governments that are going on around the world at the moment. But again, as I say, we here in Leicester can't really affect so much change. We can pray for them, we can support them as much as we can, and we can support people on the ground in the legal framework and the rights that we have. But we also obviously have situations in this country where we really, really need to challenge the narrative against the Muslim community. Okay,
all right. Let's talk about this country, inshallah. So I understand MEND is a British organisation. Can you give me a brief history of MEND?
So MEND, in its present format, has been now, how time is, Ibrahim, but I would say 6 years. In its present format. I think prior to being called MEND, it was called I Engage, which was a similar framework but different individuals. But I think they had the same fundamental idea of promoting the positivity of the Muslim contribution to the British society and the wider society, and combating Islamophobia and engaging the Muslim community more with the political situation in this country and working with the media, etc., and knowing your rights, essentially. So in the last 6 years, as I say, the most amazing thing about MEND, that in the, alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the majority of the people are like myself, are volunteers. So we all have, a lot of us have day jobs and for the rest of the spare time that we can give, we try to work within the framework that MEND allows us to. Okay. And tackling Islamophobia is just not something that you can just say, but there's a whole structure of doing that in terms of working primarily with our own community, with the Muslim community, to empower them, and that's probably the most appropriate word, so that they can engage with the wider community, whether it be media, whether it be politics.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to cover empowerment a little later. I wanted to know why did you volunteer for MEND? What made you volunteer for MEND?
Okay, so multiple of reasons, but the main reason I would say is that with my work, I would commute. Say, for example, I would get in my car in the morning and I have an hour's drive to my work, and I would put the radio on. It would either be Radio 4 or Radio 5. This would be about 6-7 years ago, but it's been going on for several years. And without fail, virtually every single day on this so-called highbrow radio stations, you would hear a story of a negative story about Muslims or Islams, whether that be a cultural reference, whether that be an international story, whether that be a domestic violence story, they will always seem to link it with Islam and Muslims. And sometimes they would say the most absurd things that, for example, I always distinctively remember once they used the term nasheed. Now, yourself and myself, when we hear nasheed, is something that we did at Jalsas, or it's something that we encourage our children to pray, or we go to events where nasheed will be sung. But they were using the term nasheed in a real negative and aggressive manner, that this was the songs of war that Muslims do. So I thought, so you're in the car, you're a normal person, you don't really know that many Muslims, or you don't know anything about Islam, but you've got this message about a story every single day, negative about Muslims, whether it is safes, it's domestic violence, whether it's honor killings. They seem to link it with our religion, although it may have nothing to do with Islam at all. Mm-hmm. I get to work and I have employees who read the newspaper at lunchtime, and there are certain tabloids and certain broadsheet newspapers. For example, one of them would be, say, for example, the Daily Mail. Again, not many days would go by where if you looked at that newspaper, there would be a negative story or a negative slant against Muslims or Islamic countries, or something culturally to shed a negative light. So there you go. So you've listened to the radio and you've heard a negative story about Muslims. You've read the newspaper and there's something not positive, forget positive, something negative about Muslims. Then you come home and you maybe have time to watch the news in the evening, and it will be covering conflict in Muslim countries. Okay, so again, it'll be highlighting the negativity. If an incident by one individual, the whole Muslim community would be targeted exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And you begin to think that if we have made this country our home, second generation, now third generation, mashallah, we're establishing ourselves, we're building our masajids, we're building our madrasas, we're building our future here with our homes, etc. But with the trajectory that it was going, and if we were to put ourselves to a person living somewhere which has never met a Muslim before, and so much negativity is being portrayed, what would be your perception of Muslims and Islam? And how will that project to my children and your children growing up in this country? What would be their environment for where they can practice their deen and work as being part of the British society and see no contradiction in that? Or is it going to be progressively more and more difficult? So when I used to read something in the newspaper, I may individually write something to the editor. If I saw something on the news, I was the sort of individual that would email them or ring the news channel and say, look, this is contentious, I don't agree with what you say. But alhamdulillah, when men came along, it gave a platform where it was a little bit more coherent in order to challenge this narrative, which is one thing, but also to empower the Muslim community to make sure that we don't become the same as some of these other countries which have been really targeted, which are really targeting the Muslim community. So that's a very brief journey into why I volunteered for MEND.
Okay, excellent. And empowerment, you mentioned empowerment. Can we go through some of the examples? So, for example, if we see a negative press article, what can somebody do? And what does MEND recommend that we do?
First of all, we need to understand how the media in this country works. So, very interestingly, I talked about the media. You've mentioned media as well. Statistically, and I'm sure you're aware of this, and maybe many of your listeners are, a study was done by Lancaster University. It's been a little while since this research was done. I suspect it may even be worse now. But the research was done over several years where they analysed the national newspapers in this country, broadsheet and tabloids, all the big newspapers. And they found, Ibrahim, that for every one neutral mention of a Muslim, not a positive mention, just a neutral mention of a Muslim, it was counterbalanced by 21 negative mentions. So if you were to mention that you had a guest on your show called Shokat and you said 21 negative things about me, which is probably quite easy to do, and then just one neutral thing, no matter how balanced you are as an individual, you would be influenced. I would be influenced because you heard 21 negative things as opposed to one normal things. So therefore, these are the sort of things that we have to challenge. Now, there's two ways of doing this. One is understanding how the press works, how to make a complaint, what regulates the press, what are the editors' codes, what are the ethical codes, what are they allowed to say and what are they not allowed to say and what they can get away with. But unfortunately, the more you look at this, you will realize that the press in this country has a real freedom of saying whatever they really want to, as long as they put it down as an opinion piece. Okay, there are some regulations which they cannot blur, but what we do as an organization, we run master classes where we teach people exactly how the mechanism of the media work, which media represent what thought, and if you were to see or read something or hear something, what is the best way to try to rectify it. That is one way to do it, and that is very, very important. But the truth of the matter is, what we really need is a complete overhaul, and we need to change the existing regulation, because until we don't change that, all we will be doing is asking for corrections, asking for apologies from the newspaper, which is still very important to do, and it must be done. But I think if I can make my point, and if it's not clear, please tell me, that is very reactionary. See? Mm-hmm. So we'll say, because they'll write a very big headline against Muslims, and even if we can prove that they weren't supposed to say that, 3 to 4, maybe 5 months down the line, where everybody's forgotten that they've already seen that headline, and then they will give an apology, not as prominent, on a side page under the horse racing results or whatever, greyhound racing results, where you need special glasses to read the apology. So until we don't empower ourselves enough to ensure and pressure the political class to change the legislation, we will always be responding, we will always be reactive. But that is one step in order to challenge. The other empowerment is people understanding their rights with the political system in this country, what they can expect from their MPs, how they can hold people that we elect into power responsible. So if we see that there's going to be an attack on our sisters who wear the hijab or niqab, or schoolgirls who wear a hijab, if we see there's going to be an attack on halal food because they want to pass it as inhumane, if they see that they want to affect Muslim schools without knowing all the statistics and facts, we have to empower, know the answers, know the law in this country, and be able to challenge it robustly. And these are the sort of things that we do, working with the community, with the classes that we run, with the courses that we run, alhamdulillah, majority of which, if not all of them, are fi sabilillah as well.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned that it doesn't seem we need a complete overhaul of the system. So is it worth complaining? Has there been any notable successes when men volunteers have written into the papers or complained to Ofcom or engaged with the politicians?
At the moment, and say this is there's a regulator called IPSO, Independent Press Standard Organisation, which regulates the media, and they're I don't know the exact figures, but the amount of time they have made a newspaper issue an apology is very, very little. But one of the success rates that we've had as MEND and other organisations that complained was about 4 years ago, when they front page of the Sun newspaper, and there was also an editorial in the Times, printed a full-blown article that 1 in 4 British Muslims support jihadis. And this was a completely manipulation of the survey, complete lie of what the question was, and it was just a very sensational headline, and it was accompanied by a picture of somebody, in case people didn't know what they looked like, a jihadi, and then they had an editorial piece saying that this should be a wake-up call to all the people of this country, that the Muslims are a clear and present danger, they all support jihadis. MEND, along with lots of other people, complained. IPSO chose MEND as the main complainant, and it found that survey was carried out was extremely misleading, and the results were extremely manipulated, and there was no such thing as the 1 in 4 Muslims in this country support jihadis, and they had to issue an apology, I think probably for the first or possibly the second time that the Sun newspaper had to issue an apology. But now let's look at this, Ibrahim. The apology was printed few months after, I think it was 4 months after, when traditionally it has the lowest readership, which is during the Easter months for some reason or another, and the issue was published on page 2. Now those who know the Sun will understand the significance of that.
Okay. Right, interesting. And have you had any successes with Ofcom? And I understand the radio and the TV, they're regulated by an organisation called Ofcom. So have there been any notable successes with them?
Ofcom itself is a lot more stringent regulator than IPSO. So what people have to say on the radio, as you know yourself, working on the radio, has to be a lot more counterbalance than just have one narrative. So there has been some success stories, but majority of the time, it on top of my head, it has always been something that the editorials have taken into consideration, but usually there hasn't been enough where an apology has been made. Social media, again, is the new beast, which is having new regulation. Again, there have been incidences where there has been apologies and people have been retracting their statements, but on the whole, people seem to use that as a platform to say whatever they want to do under the guise of anonymity, so they can say whatever they like about the Muslim community. I don't have the exact figures on hand. Actually, I do, if you just give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
Between March 2016 and March 2017, so in 1 year, there were just under 144,000 tweets were sent from the UK that are considered to be anti-Islamic. So that's close to 400 tweets just in the UK. So, for example, we've got the now infamous Katie Hopkins, who said, Muslim men raping white women is consistent with the teaching of Islam. Revoke their citizenship and deport the swear word. And this was in the back of the grooming gang scandal. So, this was left unchallenged, and she could say that. So close to 400 tweets a day, anti-Muslim tweets. So again, along with the media, along with everything else, that's a barrage. And then Islamophobia is on a chain, Ibrahim. So you get negative media reporting, you get certain government legislations, and we have a prime minister now who openly called our sisters letterboxes and bank robbers, the minority of whom, a minority and possibly a minority who decide to wear a niqab and being elected to the highest office in this country. So you have politicians stirring up the rhetoric. You have the media presenting a very anti-Islamic and anti-Muslim scenario. Hence, you get people who get riled up. Hence, you get people who feel emboldened, and then you see the rise of the far right, and then you see the devastation and the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm. If someone like somebody in public office says the kind of things that Boris Johnson says, what effectively can we do?
What we can do, and the Muslim community has to wake up to this fact that in fact we do have quite a strong political voice. If you look at other communities that have been residing in this country, maybe admittedly for a little bit longer than we have, they were united in their efforts to maintain the integrity of their people, of their faith, and of their culture. And they created a very strong body. So therefore, if anybody in power decides to speak out against them, they would feel that at the next political election. They will feel the full force of that, either financially, in not supporting that party, or in the votes that count. Mm-hmm. So we have to, as Muslim community, alhamdulillah, we are not a homogenous group of people. We are not all the same, mashallah. That's the beauty of one of the beauties of our religion. We come from different backgrounds, we speak different languages, we have different cultures with different colours. But when it comes to our deen, we must understand and ensure that our unity, our single unity, is everybody's unity. And when the Muslim community is attacked, they don't ask where you come from or which mosque you belong to or which part of the Muslim world you come from. It only matters that you are a Muslim, or even, unfortunately, just look like a Muslim, because, unfortunately, a lot of Sikh people are victims of Islamophobia because people think that they're Muslims. So, but that's more on the ground. But if you look at politically as well, the Muslim community should stand up in a united front and make their votes count, and make sure that these people are challenged robustly as our elected leaders. And if we're not happy with them, ensure that they're not coming to power again.
Okay. Yeah, so basically engaging with the political process. Okay.
Yes.
All right. And Islamophobia seems like a form of hate. It seems we have hate laws in this country. So is there really a need for an organisation like MEND? Can't we just go to the police and complain about it?
Yeah, you see, what it is, it's very interesting in this country and possibly other country as well. We have different laws that protect people. There's different rules to protect people if they are just attacked on the street, and there's a different law if they're attacked because of their race, and there's a different law if they're attacked because of their religion. Okay, so in the newspaper scenario, let's talk about in the newspaper scenario, or somebody on the street. People of race and people of religion have very different protection in the United Kingdom. People of race have much higher protection. So for example, the definition of race is a group of people that come from a common land ancestry, speak a common language, and have a common culture. So, for example, Jewish people generally speak the Hebrew language, come from one part of the world originally, so they are considered as a race. Sikh people, again, come from the Punjab region of India, speak a common language, have a common culture, so they are a race. Black people, because of their colouring, etc., is seen as a race. So again, so the protection for them is very different from a religious perspective. So Christians, Muslims don't have the same protection that the people of religion have, people of race have, excuse me. So a very, very basic example, if I was to stand in town hall, hold up a banner and say, no more black people in this country, no more Jewish people in this country, what would happen to me? I would be arrested, rightfully so. Okay, but if I was to stand up, hold up a banner and say no more Muslims in this country, that is freedom of speech, because that protection is not afforded to religion as it is to race. So therefore, again, we have to engage in order to equalize the legislation. We don't want better protection, but we don't want more protection. We just want to have the same protection as is afforded to race.
Okay, so there's inequalities in the law, in the way the law is actually defined.
In race and religion, yes.
Is there any way we can change the laws?
Yeah, we have to. Again, we have, as well as a media class, we have a political masterclass, which explains now there's a lot of legislation that passed by and again, without sounding too disheartened, despondent with the Muslim community, once they're passed, we get very, very upset. But there's actually a whole process before that. And, you have opportunities to interject at times before it becomes legislative. You again, make sure that your MP that you have voted for doesn't vote for something that you don't believe in. And you make that perfectly clear, and you make an appointment to see them. You lobby them, and therefore that is why it's very, very important to have organisations like MEND and other organisations. I'm sure MCB has a little structure, has a department that deals with these things, to ensure that we have lobbying groups, think tanks, to influence, to encourage, and to forward the opinions of the Muslim community and the concerns of the Muslim community. So therefore, we're not always playing catch-up. That is why it's absolutely essential that organizations that are engaged in these matters are supported as much as possible from the grassroots, from our communities, from our madrasas, and from our masajids, from our ulama, from people that are in our community leaders, and support these organizations in order to speak up for the Muslim community when it matters.
Okay, you've mentioned these kind of organizations. Can you name a few and what they do? So, and what is the importance? Are these pressure groups important?
As I just reiterated, they're extremely important. They're extremely important in order to ensure that we are not playing catch up. What it is extremely important in order for our masajids to run as they are, for ensuring that halal food is still available, to ensuring that our girls can wear the hijabs at school, to ensure that sisters that wish to wear the niqab can continue to wear the niqab, to ensure that when Muhammad or Sister Amina applies for a job, she is not going to be discriminated against. These are the organizations that have to be supported in order to highlight the facts. So when we go into the House of Parliament and we present them with these facts, it makes them think that, first of all, that the Muslim community is aware that these things are going, and you will be made accountable. And we need to change the legislation in order to make it more compatible for the Muslim community to work and strive in this country just as well as everybody else. So let's talk about employment. So, for example, a study was done by the BBC of all organizations, where they sent out a CV, identical CV, in the name of Muhammad, and the other CV exactly the same CV with all the same detail. The only thing that they changed was the name. I can't remember the name. I think it was Adam Smith, but I may be wrong. But it was a non-Muslim name. So the person with the non-Muslim name, exactly same CV, was given 3 times more likely to get an interview than a Muslim-sounding name.
Okay. So even before they got the job, yeah. So even before they got their foot in the door, yeah. Okay. No, okay. And how do we tackle something like that? How do we change people's perceptions?
So first of all, we have to make the wider community aware that this is the situation. Until you don't walk in somebody's shoes, you don't really understand. So growing up, we know now with the whole Black Lives Matter, and until you don't realize how difficult it is for a person from the black race and what they're going through, it's very, very difficult to empathize, and sometimes you don't even know. But therefore, that's why we need to highlight these issues. We need to highlight that issues within our own community, and we need to highlight that to our employers. We need to highlight this to our legislators. We need to highlight this to the councillors. We need to highlight this to the police force. So all around, it's going to take a holistic approach, not just one person. It has to be a whole campaign that people are aware that this is happening. Otherwise, it'll just be, you're just complaining again. But no, we're not complaining. We haven't got time to complain. We've all got busy lives. We've got things to do. But we need to ensure that if we are going to continue, because, for example, if you can't get a job, then you fall into socio-economic problems. You fall into socio-economic problems, it builds up a whole cycle. Mm-hmm. Then you don't get a job. Where do you get your money from? Then when your healthcare goes down, then you're blocking up the hospitals. Then it all plays into the hands of the people. Look at these guys. They don't work. They're always ill. For example, unfortunately, the Muslim community do have a high rate of illness compared to the non-Muslim counterparts. Mm-hmm. So it's all a cycle. So we've only been established in this country, 50, 60, 70 years now? But if we want to be here in the next 70 years, then we really do need to start making a change now in order to ensure that our children and our children's children are thriving in this country, proudly to be Muslim and proudly to be British.
You mentioned children. Is there any evidence of Islamophobia in schools?
Yeah, unfortunately, there has been, Ibrahim Bhai. It's one of the other things, as I say, why I joined MEND for, is because I've got children here. They don't know anything different. I wasn't born here, but I would find it difficult to live anywhere else. They would virtually find it impossible to live with the comforts that this country offers. But let's just have a look at the NSPC's report in 2017, that some children, including a lot of Muslim children, had experienced religious bullying so bad that they had resorted to self-harm, including skin whitening, etc., which comes into the racial element. But because they were called so many things, they did not wish to be seen as part of this race group, that they were harming themselves. And we're talking about young children here. We're talking about barely reaching double digits because of pressures and And the other really alarming fact was Childline, which is another organization that looks after the welfare of our children, recorded a 69% increase in racist bullying in playgrounds. So what were the words that were used? The words that were used were bomber, terrorist, go back to where you come from. So we can imagine who that was said against. And we have dealt with, and I have personally dealt with, our wonderful city, our cosmopolitan city like Leicester, that has been seeing Muslim children being bullied on social media, exactly those words. You're a bomber, what are you going to do, bomb me, etc., etc. And this disenfranchises children from a very, very young age, and they don't feel part of the society, and that opens up a box of its own sorts of problems. So again, children are being bullied as well, purely because they're Muslims, and this has to be challenged.
Mm-hmm. So just taking one of those taunts, and let's take it seriously. So do we really belong in this country? Do Muslims really belong in this? Why should we expect anything from Britain? What have Muslims contributed to this country?
Yeah, I think we belong where we are. We're the fabric of the society, and what haven't we contributed to this country now? We're not saying by any stretch of the imagination, Muslim community, like any community, any community, and there's not a community with exception that hasn't got its shortcomings and hasn't got its faults and hasn't got its group of people within that are misdemeanors, but not because they're Muslims, it's just human nature. So to answer your question, two-step, yes, we do belong to this country, and yes, we are the citizens of this country and citizens of Europe and citizens of the world. In terms of what we've contributed, again, we would need another whole hour. We could go back to scientific times of the contributions that were made in this country. Let's just go back to education and a common theme of the female empowerment in the Muslim community. One of the first people in the Islam to open up a university in the Muslim world was a Tunisian princess in Morocco. It's one of the first established, still running universities in the world. I think it's over 1,000 years old, and that was done by a sister. And they were taught in languages, they were taught arts, they were taught music in this university at that stage. And it was only 500 to 600, 700 years later that the West and Britain with Oxford and Cambridge caught up. If you talk about inventions, the Muslim community, every day, how many cups of coffee are sold in this country? Coffee is originated from the Islamic world, etc. The science that we learn, my profession, I'm an optometrist, light was done by a Persian, an Islamic Muslim scientist, who Ibn Haytham, who discussed the optics of light and pinhole cameras, etc., was all fundamentally done on his works. But that's historical. If we look at more modern times, just the wars that we've just, when we do the World War I, we've been 100 years in 2019, when the World War I finished. In the First World War, there were 400,000 Muslim soldiers that fought on the side of the Allies. In the Second World War, there were over 1 million Muslim soldiers that fought on the side of the Allies as well. So the contribution made by Muslims in the two major world wars fought by the Western powers, a substantial amount of their soldiers were from the Muslim faith. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not aware of this, including the Muslim community, that how much contributions they have made. If we look at it today, if you look at the work that the Muslim community do in terms of running businesses, those that run the NHS, of the people that say that they're from the Muslim, who have declared their faith, so many percentile, if not more than 10% of the NHS is run by declare themselves as Muslims. So we make massive contributions, whether it's to the economy, whether it's to the healthcare, whether it's to academia, teaching, small businesses. MashaAllah, the Muslim community is thriving and contributing to the fabric of this society.
Okay, and Jazakallah, it seems that there are a lot of contributions that we as Muslims can highlight to people who come to us with Islamophobic statements.
Yeah. Once again, if they come out with "What have you ever done?" There's a whole lot. It requires a little bit of reading, and you will know the contribution that the Muslim community has made.
Excellent. Okay, listeners who have just joined us, you're listening to Radio Sira on 1575 AM and online at radiosira.com on this rainy Tuesday afternoon on the 19th of January. If you've got any questions, please do feel free to text in these last 10-15 minutes to 07305 828531. So if you have any questions about Islamophobia for our guest Shaukat Patel, chair of the local MEND working group, please do text in on 07305 828531. Jazakallah khair. Now, Brother Shaukat, we've talked about international Islamophobia. And I hope, Brother Shaukat is still with us. We've talked about international Islamophobia. We've also talked about national Islamophobia. It seems that in Leicester, is there any issues in Leicester? I mean, do we face Islamophobia here?
Unfortunately, a city like Leicester, mashallah, which is a great city to live in, especially from the Muslim community, with our abundance of our masajids and our madrasas and our ulama, so we are not immune from it, Ibrahim Bhai. I think there was a very famous case a few years back, which I'm sure you're aware of, and in fact, indeed, was part of in resolving, was the Sister Zainab Hussain case in the Beaumont Leys, which was a notorious attack on a Muslim woman who was coming back home after having dropped off her children to school, like millions of other parents had done on that particular morning. And as she was walking on the pavement, a car mounted the pavement and ran Sister Zainab over, which was initially could have been seen, as Sister Zainab describes herself, as an accident. But while she was lying on the ground again, this same car did a U-turn virtually and ran her over again. And it was only through the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the amazing work done by the emergency services that her life was saved after countless operations and I think close to half a year in hospital. And it transpired that the individual that had committed this crime was only due to the fact that she was a Muslim, and he wanted to take revenge on the Muslims because of situations in Iraq or the 7/7 bomb attacks in London. So this was in our city, where a woman was coming home, minding her own business, was ran over, left for dead, but by the grace of Almighty, and was virtually at the time not highlighted very much at all. So this is just one extreme case of Islamophobia, but we do get cases of sisters having their headscarves pulled off, verbally abused, and the children's cases as well that I've mentioned to you. So unfortunately, we're not immune on it here, and we are kept busy because as an organization, we have something called the Islamophobia Response Unit, which is a legal team. It wasn't around at the time of Zainab Hussain's case, but it is now, where we give free support and guidance to anybody that has been a victim of Islamophobia.
Okay. And I'd like to get the number of the Islamophobia response unit. But before that, regarding the case of Sister Zainab in Beaumont Leys, what specifically was the involvement of MEND, and how did it help in that particular situation?
So the situation was this, that after this tragedy had occurred, it was very, very unknown, and the newspaper, our local newspaper, had reported it as a collision. So it was a car accident or a traffic accident, and the police had reported it as such on their official website. It was very evident and obvious from the initial, when we were called as an organization to speak to the Beaumont Leys community Muslims, and speaking to the family members of Sister Zainab, that this was anything but an accident, or it was just one of those unfortunate things that had happened where somebody had lost control of the car. Because on the very day that this gentleman was arrested for Sister Zainab's attack, he had confessed to the fact that he had done it as a crime, as a revenge against Muslim community. And in his own words in court, he said that the British people should be proud of what he had done, and he should be a hero rather than being a victim, rather than being accused of anything else. So what we did as an organisation is highlight the situation, that to correctly identify it as an attack, an Islamophobic attack. Because let's be perfectly honest, if this was done the other way around, and a Muslim individual had carried out this incident on the suburbs of Market Harborough, for example, and ran over an individual, and on the end of running over this individual, saying that he had done this in the name of Islam, I think yourselves and all the listeners at home would know what the headlines would have been in the papers and how it would have been reported in that case. So therefore we worked to ensure that it was reported correctly. We also ensured to work that there was a lot of other issues happening within the community in Beaumont Leys. So the best way to deal with resolve these things is to get everybody that's involved, which was the communities, the masajids, the councillors and the police, to come and sit together and discuss the issues that were happening. So this time, as tragic as it was, it could have been a lot worse. And when we spoke to the sisters in the Beaumont Leys community, they were surprised that nobody hadn't been killed up to this point, because there was a lot of acrimony within the community, and there was a lot of racist attacks happening against our Muslim brothers and sisters in that particular community. So we worked very hard to engage the community, to give them a platform to discuss this, and to make it easier so the councillors could help the local community, to help the local police, so that everybody could be kept safe.
Okay, and I understand that you or MEND got the council to pass a motion. Could you tell me a little bit about that? So this is Leicester City Council.
Yeah, so this was Leicester City Council, and alhamdulillah, on the back of the Zainab Hussain case, we spoke to the councillors in the chamber and Leicester and councillors individually, who passed a motion that, along with all other forms of hate, along with all other forms of racism, they would also uphold any attacks against Islamophobia. And according to my understanding, I may be wrong on this, but according to my understanding, it was one of the first times that council had specifically mentioned Islamophobia as a separate category.
So,
and there was some resistance.
Okay, carry on. Carry on.
As a separate category, and to ensure that not only that the council had made a positive statement to protect the Muslim community from any form of discrimination, they would work with organizations in order to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again.
Excellent. And I understand there was some work that MEND, as a consequence of this particular incident, did MEND work with the schools as well? Was there some work done with the schools in the local area?
Yeah, we spoke with the school, and as an organisation, one of the best ways to tackle Islamophobia, as I said, we've spoken about working with our MPs, we've spoken about working with the media. It's school children. We can teach children from a very, very young age that racism, hatred, anti-Semitism is wrong. We can teach them Islamophobia is wrong. So we have prepared and created some fantastic work that the teachers themselves can present in their schools to ensure that children understand how hate and how xenophobia and hatred or racism of any shape or form can have such detrimental and negative effects, not only on the victim that you're perpetrating against, but on the wider society as well. So yeah, we spoke with the schools, and inshallah soon we are hoping to present these Islamophobia presentations to some of the schools in Leicester as well.
Excellent, inshallah. Okay, we've got a few texts coming in, and we're approaching the last 5 minutes, so we'll go quickly through these texts. How much of a role has the media played in promoting Islamophobia, is one of the questions.
I think the media, as we've discussed, Ibrahim Bhai, is one of the paramount, one of the most important factors in promoting Islamophobia. But one has to understand that when I say press, if we look at the press in any country, or if we look at the press in this country historically, it's the newspapers are there, they exist, they have to make money. So if you looked at the newspapers in this country in the 30s, in the 20s, newspapers that still exist today, the stories that they ran were extremely anti-Semitic, because at that particular time they were demonizing the Jewish community. So therefore it was perfectly fine for them to run stories against the Jewish community, because that sold them newspapers. They needed an enemy, they needed somebody to attack, they needed to demonize somebody. If you look back a bit closer to the times, if you look at the 60s, 70s particularly, and then definitely through the 80s, how the black community was demonized. Yeah, they were really, really racism, and then you read the newspapers of black, and anybody even within our community would be like, oh my God, the Western community, etc., because the newspapers were perpetrating this story. Now they've otherized, they've demonized the Muslim community, and hence why not many days can go by where you can read newspapers where Little John can say, that Muslims will want to go. For example, there was a Muslim community that wanted to go to Legoland. He wrote such a derogatory article around that and said, how could dare Legoland open its theme park again for Muslims to go, and just demonizing the Muslim community, and that's just one example of so many others that I could give, and it goes unchallenged, unfortunately.
Okay. And it kind of follows on. So we see a lot of negative press stories. Is there anything that we can proactively do? Can we, for example, submit positive stories to the newspapers?
The population of Muslims in this country, Bremba, is 5%. There's 5%, and the Muslim journalists in this country are 0.4 or 0.3%.
Okay.
So there's a disparity there. So we're not controlling the storyline here. Okay. So what we need to ensure that, yes, we can have our own newspapers, yes, we can have our own television channels. That's absolutely fine. but that's only going to serve a certain purpose, a certain community, talking to the converted, so to speak.
Yeah.
So we need to ensure that we encourage people to engage in that media, so therefore we can represent our story. So when you've got Muslim journalists, when you've got Muslim editors, when you've got Muslim newsreaders, when you've got Muslim controllers of big corporations, then we will see a shift change. And, they will be fairer, they will be balanced, and we will have to take the criticism when the criticism is in there. It's not something that, we're beyond criticism. Of course we're not, but we need to have a balance. And that is, for me, one of the most important things that we can do.
Inshallah, okay. And we mentioned the Islamophobia response unit. So if somebody is unfortunately a victim of an Islamophobic attack, MEND has an Islamophobia response unit. How does a victim get in touch with Islamophobia response unit?
So yes, if they go onto the website, that is probably the best way to do it. Islamophobia, IRU. Yeah. And that would, if you Google and you can email them, and that would be the best way for them to get them. There's a telephone number as well, which I will get to, inshallah, as soon as possible.
Inshallah, okay. And does MEND have a website where people who are interested in the work of MEND or volunteering for MEND that they can access? What's the website address?
So let me just give you the Islamophobia Response Unit telephone number, first of all, Ibrahim Bhai.
Mm-hmm.
It's 020 39
Yep.
3904
3904
6555.
6555. So that's 0203 904 6555. I'll just repeat that once more.